Welcome back to the Brahmin Word, and we are diving into the interpretation of King Nebuchadnezzar's first dream. And this is a really, really fascinating passage, especially when it comes to global history. And so I don't want to waste any time. I want to dive right in. But as we are reading, though, the big thing that I think we want to really take away from this passage is that God is in control of every single detail in history, including the rise and fall of empires. And so, with that knowledge, we can trust Him with every single thing that we are dealing with, even though that's easier said than done for sure. But with that being said, let's dive into the interpretation of this dream. Verse 30, so we are going back to Daniel chapter 2. We are going to be looking at the rest of the chapter, so verses 31 through 49. So let's start at verse 31. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold, all together, were broken in pieces, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. So you have the dream. So you need two things if you are Daniel. You need the dream itself, and you need the interpretation of the dream. So we are already halfway there, which is pretty remarkable in itself. But as Daniel is about to remind us, though, he is not the revealer of dreams, it is the Lord. But when it comes to the dream itself is this massive statue, and there are four parts to it. So you have the head of gold, you have the chest and arms of silver, you have the middle or the torso and the thighs of bronze, and then you have the legs of iron along with its feet of iron and partly of clay. Now, there is a theory that there are five different parts here. Some believe that the feet being partly of iron and partly of clay references to a fifth kingdom. I don't see that though. I think the phrase its feet partly of iron and partly of clay is a description of the first phrase in verse 33, its legs of iron. I think it's showing the cracks that show up within this kingdom later on, which, by the way, that is what we are going to see as the interpretation, that these are talking about four kingdoms and then this stone that comes out of nowhere. But we'll get to that in just a second. But now comes the interpretation. Verse 36. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. Most likely, the we here is probably referencing the Lord and Daniel. It could be referencing the Lord, Daniel, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but my guess it's probably there to reference the Lord and Daniel. That's my guess. Verse 37. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Now, there's a couple things here that I want to point out. First off, the King of Kings. Well, we see that a lot, especially in Christianity, we equal the King of Kings with Jesus. So, what's going on here when we are talking about Nebuchadnezzar being the King of Kings? Well, of course, first off, from a linguistic point of view, you have the K here in King of Kings lowercase, whereas a lot of the times with Jesus, if not all the time, we see him as capital K. So you do have a slight difference in language there. But I think the point here, though, is that Daniel recognizes and understands the authority that God has given to Nebuchadnezzar to be a ruler of an empire, even for a short amount of time. And so he is rightfully a king of kings because he is a conqueror, which is why we call Jesus the King of Kings, because he conquers everyone. He conquers all kings, all authority. So anyways, that's why I think we see that description there. But then you wonder to yourself, okay, why is he allowing his head to get bigger and bigger and bigger by all of these compliments? Well, I think it's to show that Babylon is indeed the head of gold. Nebuchadnezzar believes himself to be the best, and this pride does become an issue for Nebuchadnezzar later on, for sure. But but here he sees himself as being the best of the best, the top, which he is in this dream. He is the head of gold, but he's not the foundation. He is not the only kingdom here. And we see that with what comes next. Verse 39. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you. I think here, the one that is equal to the chest and the arms of silver, it is the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians that most likely took charge in 539 BC and then had charge until the early 300s BC. And don't get me wrong, they were very much an empire. But why are they referred to as inferior? There is definitely a sense of not a not a strong leadership with the Medes and Persians as there was with the Babylonian Empire, so that could be part of it. But they are also just not referenced as much as Babylon and Greece and Rome, as we will see here in a second. And so, therefore, they are seen as lesser. So I think that's why they're described as such there. And most of the time in ancient Near East, silver was seen very much as lesser, as a lesser mineral than gold. Uh, Continuing verse 39, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. So the bronze was the torso and the thighs, so the core. So the core of the statue, you would think very, very important. And it was. This is the Greek Empire. So the Greek Empire, started by Alexander the Great in the early 300s BC to about the mid 100s BC. Incredibly important, vast empire. It is massive. However, this empire as well falls, as we see, because there is a fourth kingdom, verse 40, and there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things, and like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. Well, so this fourth kingdom is really, really fascinating. This one is Rome. And Rome is really, really interesting and definitely the most vast of the empires, which I think is why it's the legs and the feet of this statue. It's the foundation of this statue because it is the longest of the empires. Now, according to some, it starts in the mid 100s BC. According to some, there could be 5 different dates where the Roman Empire really starts to fall apart, ending with 1453 in the east, 1453 AD, or 1476 in the west. So there's all sorts of different theories when the Roman Empire really started to crumble. But the big part, though, is that it crumbles. So the fact that it is described as having feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the furnace of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with soft clay. And we see that with all these emperors and this internal struggle within the Roman Empire. Verse 42. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. And we definitely see that towards the end of the Roman Empire, especially with bands like the barbarians that so easily throttled them when they shouldn't. But it's because there was so much internal struggle within the empire that it left it brittle. Verse 43. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. Now, does this talk about different uh, marriages within the emperors? Maybe, but I think it's more talking about the fact that there are so many different ideologies and conflicting views within the Roman Empire at the end that it just falls apart. But then comes the stone, the rock that comes in that just obliterates the statue. Verse 44. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw the stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, a great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain and its interpretation sure. So the stone is the Lord's plan. And obviously, as followers of Jesus, we see the stone as being Jesus himself and the followers of Jesus with him, as they will conquer the world, as we see in Revelation, setting up the 1,000-year reign. And then, of course, for all of eternity, those who follow Jesus will reign with him, will live with him for eternity. So I think clearly that is the stone that turns into the mountain that will last forever and will reign over the whole earth. But obviously, Daniel has done the impossible, and so therefore he's rewarded, and very, very much so. Verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. So, verse 49 shows that the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego probably weren't in the room during the interpretation, as we mentioned earlier. But here, clearly, it is all about the rewarding the faithfulness of Daniel, which is a big part of his character. But what's interesting here is a couple things. And one is the fact that, honestly, Daniel could have been killed on the spot for saying that, yes, he praised Nebuchadnezzar and he equated him to the head of gold of the statue. But he also said that his kingdom will come to an end. That could be seen as treason. Like, that could have definitely been seen as treason. And so he could have died right there. But I think, again, King Nebuchadnezzar was so distraught by this dream and so just fed up with being told whatever he wanted to hear that he was just incredibly thrilled by the fact that somebody just told him the truth. The truth, even if it wasn't something that he had in his mind. He probably had in his mind, his heart, that his kingdom would last forever, that the Babylonian Empire would last forever. Even if that is a little bit out there to think that, that probably was his idea. And so to be told that that's not going to happen, it could have been treason. But I think he was just blown away by the fact that, one, he knew what the dream was, that Daniel knew what the dream was, and then two, that he told him, honestly, this is what it means. Um, and then the final point is the praise that Nebuchadnezzar gives. Truly, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. Now, with this great speech here given by Nebuchadnezzar, don't get me wrong, all of that is true. God is the only God. He is the preeminent God. He conquers all other quote unquote deities. And he is the Lord of all kings and all empires, which was really the main point of this passage. But what's interesting is that in a moment's just time, Nebuchadnezzar completely forgets what he just said and gets so wrapped up in the image itself that he wants to think of himself as a god. And then on top of that, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stand up to him and try to remind him of who really is in charge, he flips out and tries to burn them alive. So we will get to that next week. We will walk through, or not next week, sorry. On Thursday, we'll start looking at the fiery furnace. We'll take just a break from Daniel and we'll look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the fiery furnace. Great passage. I want to dive into that. So we'll split up into two. The first part being on Thursday and the second part being next Tuesday. But thank you for spending some time here with me today, breaking down this wonderful dream and how God has his hand in every single detail, whether it is the day to day things that you and I do, or the centuries that empires rule. Just the fact that our God knows every single detail and is control of every single detail, that should be a very encouraging thing to keep in mind. But thanks for spending time with me today on the Brown Word. I will see you next time on Thursday as we dive into the fiery furnace. Thanks.